For centuries, we have been told a very specific story about the founding of America. We imagine a group of roughly 100 people aboard the Mayflower, a tight-knit community of families who stepped off the boat in 1620 and laid the genetic foundation for the modern United States. Today, millions of Americans proudly claim they are direct descendants of these famous voyagers. They hang family trees on their walls, join prestigious lineage societies, and trace their surnames back to that cold winter in Plymouth. But recently, a massive genetic project using the most advanced ancestral mapping technology ever created has uncovered a secret that has left historians and genealogists in disbelief. When scientists began comparing the actual DNA of people claiming Pilgrim heritage to the genetic markers retrieved from the original settler sites, they found a massive disconnect. The modern American Pilgrim family tree isn't just a little bit off. In many cases, the DNA doesn't match at all. It turns out that for the last 400 years, the story of who we think we are has been fundamentally altered by hidden migrations, secret adoptions, and a massive biological phenomenon that no one saw coming. Today, we are peering inside the double helix to find out where the real descendants are hiding and why the official history books might be looking for people who don't actually exist. To get to the bottom of this mystery, we have to talk about how we traditionally track heritage. For centuries, we relied on paper. Birth certificates, marriage records, and ship manifests were the gold standard. We assumed that if a name was written down, that was the final word. But paper can lie. Paper can be lost in a courthouse fire, or rewritten by a proud relative who wanted to sound a bit more noble. DNA, however, is a permanent digital record of every interaction your ancestors ever had. When geneticists began the Pilgrim DNA project, they went back to the source. They analyzed the remains of individuals from the earliest colonial settlements and established what they call a baseline genomic profile. This gave them the specific genetic code of the actual men and women who survived those first harsh years in New England. The initial shock came when the researchers began running the DNA of current members of lineage societies, people who have meticulously documented their link to the Mayflower for decades. In a staggering number of cases, the biological link was missing. Instead of the expected markers that trace back to the English villages the Pilgrims called home, many modern descendants showed genetic signatures from completely different regions of Europe, or even different continents entirely. This revealed a phenomenon known as non-paternal events, a polite way for scientists to say that the biological father wasn't who the paper records said he was. Over 400 years, those tiny breaks in the chain add up. It only takes one secret in the year 1750 to completely erase a genetic link to the 1620s. But the mystery goes much deeper than just a few family secrets. The researchers discovered that the Pilgrim identity was far less of a closed loop than we were led to believe. We often think of the early colonists as an isolated group that only married within their own circle. The DNA says otherwise. From the very beginning, there was a massive amount of genetic mixing with people who weren't supposed to be there. Scientists found early colonial markers blending with various European sailors, traders from different empires, and significantly, the indigenous Wampanoag people. These interactions weren't always recorded on paper because they didn't fit the social narrative of the time. This means that while some people are looking for their pure Pilgrim heritage, the real biological descendants are often unaware of their connection because their ancestors dropped the Mayflower name or were absorbed into different communities. The geneticists found that a huge percentage of the real Pilgrim DNA has actually migrated away from New England and shifted into populations that current history wouldn't suspect. They found some of the strongest matches in the southern United States and even in the Midwest. This suggests that the biological legacy of the Mayflower didn't stay in the fancy houses of Boston or the historical museums of Plymouth. It moved into the frontier, changed names, and blended into the massive melting pot of the American working class. The person flipping a burger in Ohio or driving a truck in Georgia is actually more likely to carry a high percentage of founder DNA than a socialite who has a framed Mayflower certificate on their wall. The DNA is effectively showing us that the aristocracy of American heritage is a social construction, whereas the biology of American heritage is much more democratic and widely dispersed. One of the most fascinating aspects of this study was the surname paradox. In modern genealogy, we put so much weight on the last name, but the researchers proved that after 10 generations, the name is almost meaningless as a biological indicator. Every time a new generation is born, the DNA is shuffled. You have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 great-grandparents, and so on. By the time you go back to 1620, You have thousands of ancestors. The Pilgrim ancestor whose name you carry provides only a tiny, microscopic fraction of your actual genetic makeup. In many cases, you might not have inherited any functional DNA from that specific person at all. You might be a descendant on paper, but a stranger in your cells. Conversely, someone who doesn't have the name might have inherited a huge block of DNA from a Pilgrim mother whose name was lost to history through marriage. The researchers used a technology called haplogroup reconstruction to track the male and female lines separately. They discovered that while the female lines, mothers to daughters, remained relatively stable in some pockets, the male lines were incredibly volatile. The Y-DNA of the original Mayflower men showed signs of what they called genetic drift. Over time, as families had fewer sons or moved around, the specific male signatures of many famous pilgrims began to vanish from the places where they were most expected. They found that several famous male lineages have actually gone extinct in their supposed descendants, replaced by the DNA of neighbors, travelers, or later immigrants who married into the families and took the famous surnames. This leads us to the Great American Swap. Geneticists realized that during the 1800s, there was a massive wave of name changes and identity rebranding. People who wanted to move up in the world would often claim a link to a founding family to gain social standing. Because there were no DNA tests in 1850, these people were accepted into the family tree, and their biological code became the new default for that branch. Fast forward to today, and their descendants are shocked to find out they have no biological connection to the Mayflower, despite having a trunk full of family heirlooms that say otherwise. The scientists also found that the environment of the New World exerted a selection pressure on the survivors. The first winter in Plymouth was a massive biological bottleneck. Only half of the company survived. This means that the DNA of modern Americans with colonial roots isn't just a random sample of English people. It's the DNA of the specific individuals who were genetically tough enough to survive extreme cold, malnutrition, and new diseases. The study found specific markers related to immune system regulation that were highly concentrated in the true descendants. These survivors passed on a specialized genetic shield to their children. One of the reasons modern Americans don't match the original profile is because of the massive influx of later immigrants who didn't go through that specific biological filter. As the project expanded, the scientists started looking at the international profile of these founders. They found that the Pilgrims themselves were much more genetically diverse than the British label suggests. Many of them had spent years in the Netherlands before sailing to America. The DNA revealed that they had already begun mixing with Dutch and French Huguenot populations before they even stepped onto the Mayflower. So even the baseline was more complex than we thought. The researchers found genetic clusters that trace back to Scandinavian and Central European regions, proving that the Pilgrim mission was a multi-ethnic endeavor from the start. But why the shock from the researchers? It was the sheer scale of the disconnect. They expected to find maybe a 10 or 15% discrepancy between the records and the reality, but in some of the more famous lineages, the mismatch exceeded 40%. Imagine being a scientist looking at the code of a person whose family has spent 400 years believing they are the direct line of William Bradford or Miles Standish, only to see that their DNA points toward a totally different part of the world. It's like discovering that your house was built on a different foundation than the blueprints suggest. It changes the way you look at the entire structure. The study has created a bit of a crisis in the world of heritage societies. For generations, these groups were based on proven paper trails. Now they are being forced to confront proven biological truths. Some societies are embracing the DNA evidence, while others are hesitant to open the door to a truth that might disqualify a huge portion of their membership. But for the scientists, this isn't about excluding people. It's about finding the hidden history. They found that the actual DNA of the Pilgrims is flourishing in communities that were historically marginalized. They found Pilgrim markers in the descendants of families who were once indentured servants, in families that migrated to the Appalachians and were cut off from the main cultural narrative, and in multiracial communities that were ignored by traditional genealogists. This is the real story of the Mayflower. It's not a story of a few people who stayed in a specific spot and kept their bloodlines pure. It's a story of an explosion. The genetic legacy of those 100 individuals has shattered and scattered across the continent. It's like a drop of ink falling into a vast ocean. The ink is still there, but it has been diluted and mixed with a million other colors. The mismatch happens because we are looking for the ink drop in its original form. But life doesn't work that way. Life flows and blends. The researchers also pointed out a fascinating biological memory within the code. Even when the surname is gone and the paper record is missing, certain segments of the genome, called identical by descent segments, can hold on to the past for centuries. They found people in modern-day California and Washington state who had never even heard of the Pilgrims but carried massive blocks of colonial founder DNA. These people were genetic ghosts, carrying the living proof of a history they didn't know they possessed. It highlights the fact that your DNA knows more about your family than your grandmother does. As we look at the data, we also see the impact of internal migration. After the Revolutionary War, many families with Pilgrim roots moved westward. They changed their names to escape taxes, to start fresh, or simply because they were illiterate and the spelling changed at every new stop. By tracing the DNA, scientists were able to bridge these gaps. They found that the real Pilgrim family tree is a sprawling, chaotic web that spans from sea to shining sea. The people who think they are outsiders to this history are often the very ones who are carrying it in their blood. The geneticists are also looking at how this mismatch affects our understanding of health. By identifying the specific founder markers, they can track how certain genetic predispositions have moved through the American population. Some hereditary conditions that were once thought to be limited to New England are actually widespread across the country, following the hidden paths of Pilgrim descendants. This proves that understanding our genetic history isn't just a hobby, it's a public health necessity. Knowing where the founder DNA actually went allows doctors to better predict the risks for millions of people. One of the most emotional aspects of the study has been the homecomings. People who were told they were nothing special or had no history are being informed that they are the biological heirs to one of the most significant events in world history. Conversely, people who have built their entire identity around being a pilgrim are having to learn that their heritage is built on a different, but equally interesting, story of immigration and resilience. The shock is the moment when the story we tell ourselves meets the reality of the cells that build us. The study has also sparked a debate about the myth of the Mayflower. If the DNA is so scattered and the records are so wrong, was the group ever really as exclusive as we thought? The researchers suggest that the Pilgrims were part of a much larger, messy, and interconnected Atlantic world. They weren't a separate species of human, they were travelers, and their legacy is one of merging, not standing apart. The match doesn't exist today because the very idea of a pure pilgrim is a historical fantasy. The reality was always about blending into the new world. For listeners interested in DNA, the lesson here is always dig deeper. If you've taken a consumer DNA test and were disappointed that it didn't match your family legend, you aren't alone. You are part of the 40%. But that doesn't mean your history is gone. It just means your history is more interesting than a piece of paper. You might be the carrier of a hidden line, or you might be the evidence of a great American rebranding. Either way, the DNA is telling you the truth of how humans actually survive. We move, we mix, we hide, and we adapt. The researchers at the heart of this project are now looking toward the 1630s and 1640s, the Great Migration period. They suspect that what they found with the Pilgrims is just the tip of the iceberg. They believe that for almost every founding group in world history, the modern descendants are often a complete genetic mismatch to the original founders. It's a universal human truth. We love to tell stories of continuity, but nature loves to innovate and mix. So, as we analyze the cracked Pilgrim family tree, we see a new American story emerging. It's a story where the founders aren't just a few people in buckled hats. They are the millions of us who carry that resilient, filtered DNA in our veins, regardless of our last name or our social status. The DNA Project has depivoted history from the elites and given it back to the general population. The true pilgrims aren't in the museums. They are in the grocery stores, the factories, and the schools of modern America. This research has definitively shown that genetic heritage is a living river, not a static monument. The reason modern Americans don't match at all is because we are a different version of the story. We are the version 2.0 of the colonial experiment. We have 400 years of additional history, additional mixing, and additional evolution baked into our code. We shouldn't be shocked that we don't match the original profile. We should be proud of the complex, global mosaic we've become. As the scientists finish their analysis, they leave us with a powerful thought. Your DNA is a gift from thousands of people who survived every war, every famine, and every pandemic in history. Whether they came over on the Mayflower or on a modern aircraft, their goal was the same: to ensure that their code continued. When we look at the mismatch in the Pilgrim tree, we aren't seeing a failure of history. We are seeing the success of life. We are seeing how our ancestors managed to weave themselves into the fabric of a new world so thoroughly that the original threads are now everywhere. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the genetic revolution of American history. It's a journey that reminds us that while we can draw lines on a family tree, the DNA will always draw its own map. The Pilgrims are still with us, hidden in the most unexpected places, proving that the real new world is the one we are still building inside our own bodies every single day. The researchers might have been shocked, but the DNA is just doing what it has always done, moving forward, one generation at a time. Stay curious about your own code, and remember that your true history is written in a language that no one can erase. The secret of the Mayflower wasn't in the ship, it was in the survivors. And if you are here today, you are a part of that survival story. Let's keep looking for those hidden matches and see what other secrets the genome is waiting to reveal.